Are you a seven-figure practice owner that wants to do more without burning out? Join us for the Seven Figure Practice Retreat, a luxury mastermind where high-level practice owners step away from the day-to-day to build systems, strategy, and freedom in the Dominican Republic. This February, spots are limited, so apply now, and our sponsors are covering 95% of the cost over at practiceofthepractice.com/7. Again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/7. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1261. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast, where we help you build a thriving private practice that you absolutely love. We're here 3-4 days a week, depending on the week, just helping have conversations around mental health care, around living a better life, around the operations of your business, but also making sure you don't just lose your soul as you build a business, that you show up to your practice and you say, I absolutely love this. You know, it's interesting, since the group practice conference that we had back in May, connecting with all these people in person. We had 90 plus large group practices that got together. And then next year, we have a bigger venue because we have just a lot of people interested. So probably 350 people to start connecting with people that are interested in talking and having breakout conversations and, speaking on the main stage. It's so interesting to hear people talk about their practices. And there are conversations happening now that I never thought when I was in grad school we'd be talking about. I never thought that AI would be something that would come out of my mouth in the same sentence as private practice. That wasn't on my radar. And I'm sure, like you, there's a lot to keep up with. And as someone that's innovative, as someone that you probably want to have your practice thrive and you want to love it, just like we talk about on this show all the time, there also are areas where we don't even know what we don't know, which is why I'm so excited to have Nate Peereboom with me. Nate is the CEO of JotPsych. JotPsych is a best-in-class AI scribe for behavioral health providers. The software reduces documentation time by 90% for therapists, counselors, social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, nurse practitioners. Since its commercial launch 20 months ago, JotPsych has scribed over 1 million patient encounters across the US, Canada, EU, Australia, and New Zealand. Nate, welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Thanks, Joe. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here and to talk AI and maybe not all the ways that it's being implemented, but a handful of the ways that we're seeing in the mental health space. But before we dig into that, just tell me a little bit about why do you care about technology? I know that whenever I interview people that are in the tech space, there's often either a personal story or something that caught your eye early in your career that you're like, wow, I want to do more in that. Maybe at the beginning you didn't think I'll be doing JotPsych AI notes, but why technology? Why did you jump into this space?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I don't get the question often, but I actually do have a somewhat interesting story. So I went to the University of Chicago. When I started at U Chicago, I thought that I wanted to do law and politics. And I thought that was going to be my world. And one summer I went and I got a green energy fellowship in China. I lived in Hangzhou, China, and I was working really as just a very low level researcher and kind of diplomatic participant with a company called Wangzhang Corporation, which is a company that makes a lot of car parts and was really interested in batteries. They were very focused on how do we create the best batteries in the world. And so I got to see some of the most incredible technology out there. And I remember being in this meeting. We were in this meeting room at Wangzhang, and it was a bunch of engineers, a bunch of business people, and we were just kind of in the background getting to watch it. And I had this really big moment of realization of technology is the coolest thing in the world. And if you don't actually understand the technology and you don't have the ability to scale it, to distribute it, to understand how it gets paid for, then it actually never leaves the lab. And so I studied molecular engineering and econ at U Chicago after that. And the rest of my early career was all in helping technology companies grow, understand their customer, build good product. And my mom and dad are clinicians. They've always been deep in the documentation world. I always knew it was a problem. My dad's a neuro-oncologist. My mom's a nurse practitioner in palliative care.
My mom's an
And
NP also.
yeah, yeah, my mom's an NP. And, they're probably on the bell curve. They're like probably the like super detailed in the way that they do documentation. They're very fastidious people in general. And I was like, this, like with the AI revolution, like there's no way that this is not a solvable problem. And so about, yeah, 20 months ago, my best friend and I from college, Jackson, started JotPsych, and it's been an incredibly exciting 2 years of building a company and serving people like my parents.
Mm. So helping the business side of it and running it and bringing the right people together on the right teams and getting the investors and all that together.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been really interested in technology as a certain, almost like art project. If you think about what technology is right now, software is like the longest book you've never read. Any software program that's out there is hundreds of millions of lines long, and it's the product of 10, 20, 50 people all writing something that works together. And there's something really intellectually interesting about figuring out the best way to do that, the best way to understand customers and human behavior. So I've always loved tech, and it's really fun to be putting all of my experience to use with JotPsych.
Yeah, I've never really thought of it like, all this whole team working together to create something new. It's like, when I think about when humans first discovered music, and it's like we're all these individuals going and killing an animal or picking berries or whatever. And then, people start making music together. And it's one of the first times that there's like a communal project, that there's something greater than the individuals. Like what you just said reminds me of that idea of like, yeah, you're creating something that no single person can take credit for, and it's all these different talents that come together in one project.
Yeah, totally, totally. So yeah, it's great.
Now, when you think about AI, let's start with what scares you. What scares you about AI?
I tend to not feel probably as much fear as I should about AI. If I think about what's scary, it's probably the challenge of measuring accuracy of AI systems and the challenge
Mm,
of participating in the iterations of improvement. I'm reading the book Nexus right now, all about how information networks work, and I think that the author really describes some serious like ethical concerns about things like alignment problems. Right now, we're in what I think is the golden age of AI, where we're not in AGI, we're not in artificial general intelligence. We are in an age where we have a very narrow set of tasks that we can accelerate and better with LLMs that are not yet of worrying power.
mhm.
And so it's a fun place to build software at the moment because we're kind of pre that revolution.
Yeah. What are you seeing in regards to problems that AI solves just so much faster than human capital can in the mental health world?
Hmm. The first thing that comes to mind is obviously note taking. I mean, we started JotPsych because we believed that that was the best place to apply artificial intelligence within the behavioral health space. One of the big shifts in terms of human capital and the way that productivity happens in our time is the shift from a primacy on generation to a primacy on editing. So 10 years ago, much of what human capital was focused on was generating the right thing, generating the right document, generating the right plan, generating the right piece of writing, generating the right list of ideas. And people in general were paid for what they generated. I think we're moving into a world where the primary skill that people need to develop is actually editing and refining something that has been pre-generated. And so a great example is documentation. JotPsych writes a medical note that is better, faster, richer, more detailed, more quantitative, more sensitive to language nuance than any human could really write. It's a machine-driven note. But you still, as a clinician, need to have the skill of, knowing what you want to include, knowing how it impacts the patient, understanding, the whole ecosystem of your practice. And so great clinicians are generating with AI, but they're actually participating in an even more thoughtful way as editors. And I think that analogy is true across almost every area of human activity right now.
Yeah. We for a long time have said we're past the information age. So very similar to what you're saying. And we're in the implementation age. That it's like, I think that's why there's such a rise of influencers. There's so much out there. Like take any category, like health. The way I want to be healthy might be different than the way you want to be healthy. And so I might be interested in things like I have a history of cancer and I have type 1 diabetes. So I'm going to have different health goals than maybe you have. So I might follow a health influencer that's way different than you because there's just so much information out there. If I find someone that I trust that aligns with my values, that it doesn't feel scammy, like all those things, then I'm more likely to then implement faster because they're doing that editing you're talking about. And I think that that's where that move from I just have to create content to like I have to create the right content for the right audience to have the right people purchasing, whether it's my counseling or my e-courses or whatever. That's where we really see people kind of rise in those, the riches are in the niches kind of idea.
Yeah, totally. That's a really interesting like internet phenomenon right now. When the internet was started, one thing that people loved about it was that it was a place of curation. You'd find a blog or an RSS feed, and you would be curated content by a particular author with a point of view. And as the internet developed in the early 2000s, we entered this age where everything started to feel very similar, and actually not that personalized because algorithms were, driving for general engagement, general views, and even within software, if software was getting more specialized, often it meant that the settings menus were just enormous. You see this with electronic health records where, the amount of customization you can do in an electronic health record is just mind boggling. And because of that, a lot of tools started to feel really, really clunky. If they wanted that kind of tailored to you, personalized, fits not just, every counselor's practice, but actually fits your practice for the way that you do medicine. And now AI is pulling us back into the hyper personalized age where, in JotSec, for example, if you edit a note, the software just learns from you as you're doing that. And the benefit is that you don't have to come up with some 6,000 if then statement file that tells the software exactly how, you want words arranged or sentence structured. Instead, it's learning naturally from how you behave about what you want your medical documentation to look like. And that really is revolutionary. That was something that EHRs were never able to do. Even like Dragon, which is a predecessor to AI scribes, Dragon is speech to text. It's extremely deterministic. It's based on someone giving a perfect oration of what they want written, and that's just not how people work. So yeah, the age of hyper personalization is upon us, and it's really exciting.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's why you see social media like TikTok be so popular so fast because if you spend an extra 5 seconds on a video than what you normally do, all of a sudden you're getting more videos like that. If you post a video with something that's a certain topic you're thinking about, you start getting more videos like that. And instead of just kind of the Instagram way of it just doesn't feel like it's as agile or as responsive so quickly. I think that we're seeing that kind of across the board. Now, there's three areas that you and I talked about that we see AI really kind of disrupting the mental health space, and that's in regards to conversational AI, triage AI, and documentation with AI. Let's start with conversation AI and kind of what that is and what that looks like.
Yeah. So we're starting to see a bunch of companies right now developing what they call conversational chatbots. And the idea is you take a modality of behavioral health care, for example, CBT, you entomb a bunch of documentation and best practices about CBT, and then you let an AI chatbot help a patient or a client through the CBT process, but in an artificial within an artificial intelligent interlocutor. And I think that the most famous of these is probably Therabot, which is out of Dartmouth. And Therabot, the study came out that Therabot was reducing MDD or depression by around 51%, and it was decreasing like GAD-7 scores by around 30%. And insurance companies, I think when they see this landscape, they're thinking, interesting. Well, should AI chatbots be the first line of treatment for some of these? It's unclear exactly how the payer landscape is going to react to this data, but it is interesting to see that that single modality treatments are probably going to have some commercially viable options in this space in the next few years.
Mm. What are some of the concerns around that you're hearing?
I think a lot of folks worry about the concept of people being witnessed in behavioral health care. It's true that you can walk someone through a set of problem-solving steps that help them, work through their own conception of their depression or anxiety. It's also true that there's a very, very real impact to being witnessed by another human being, to being understood, to having, a clinician that is not just a one-trick pony, but actually knows CBT, but also, has a colleague in TMS and can, walk you through psychoanalytical analysis. Like there's a toolkit question that I think is really material here. So, will chatbots become a part of the treatment regimen? I think it's hard to say that they will not, but that doesn't mean that clinicians are not still going to have a really, really important place in treatment.
Yeah. Yeah. Something always comes up when you're running a private practice. Well, Gusto's payroll and HR services can make it a little easier. Gusto was designed for you, the small business owner. They take the pain out of running a business, automatically calculating paychecks, filing payroll taxes, setting up open enrollment. Gusto does it all. Want more? Time tracking, health insurance, 401k, onboarding, commuter benefits, offer letters, access to HR experts. You get the idea. With Gusto, you can focus on the joy of running your private practice. It's super easy to set up and get started, and if you're moving from another provider, Gusto can transfer all your data for you. Here's the best part. Because you're a listener, you get 3 months totally free. All you have to do is go to gusto.com/Joe. Again, that's gusto.com/Joe. I'm telling you, you're going to love Gusto. Get started today. Well, let's move on to triage. What's that look like?
Yeah, triage is really interesting, particularly in emergency rooms when or in suicidality risk assessments. This is something that a lot of large health systems really worry about because it's very easy to lose the needle in the haystack. And also some of the patterns that lead to suicidality are they're not actually as easy as you might imagine for the human clinician to pick up. And so there have been a bunch of different studies done about that do two things. One, there was a study that compared decision triage support for kids who walk into an emergency room with a mental health crisis. And what that study found was that when you used AI to do the triage next to a human clinician, the decisions were very, very, very similar in a way that you could swap them in and out. So, in a setting that is chaotic, where there's a lack of, where we're reallocating a human being to doing some other form of care is actually a really, really amazing benefit to offer that clinical setting. There's some benefit potentially in using AI to at least do triage in again, an emergency room. And then the second, big example, and I think a lot of people probably know about this, is, the VA rolled out this program to assess suicidality risk and to do proactive treatment. And that program was very successful. Mental health admissions dropped by around, 8 percentage points. Emergency room visits dropped 3 to 5%. And, suicide attempts dropped between 5 and 10%. So, when you're thinking about those percentages, they might sound small, but those are real human beings. And the denominator on the VA system is huge. So really, really exciting stuff early on in the triage world. And again, that's what computers are best at: pattern recognition, bringing together variables that are really complicated and might even seem to contradict each other, and at least allowing the humans who are on the floor caring for people to have a little bit of a better insight to where they should focus resources.
Yeah, I can hear the pushback, people being there's nothing that can replace humans. We're going to lose our jobs. What do you think about when people say that in regards to especially emergency room triage?
Yeah. The principal investigator on the Therabot study is this guy named Nicholas Jacobson. And this came up when he published the study. And what he said, which I think is remarkable, is, for every clinician practicing behavioral health, there's around 1,600 people in the United States requiring care. Like, we are extremely far from having too much, healthcare for too few people. That is just not the state of our healthcare system. And, the story of healthcare is one of trying to use technological interventions to reduce the amount of healthcare people need. You could say the same thing about good, really good therapy, where someone walks away and says, hey, I actually I don't need this anymore. Or a really good pharmaceutical product where the person gets well. All of that decreases the quote unquote demand for healthcare. I think it's a hard argument to say that we shouldn't use those tools simply because the goal is to create as much demand for healthcare as we ever should.
Yeah. And I think that as there's rigorous research and, looking at how do we have best practices around it and make sure that I think the companies that are creating AI bots, have the same scrutiny as, people that are licensed to do therapy, that, to even just say, like, if this is approved, for those types of interventions, like, what is the oversight? That we can't just have any startup just say, hey, we have an AI therapy bot, because it could do harm. It could do it wrong. It could miss a suicidality. So I think that's where, figuring out how does regulation look. I mean, how do you guys, or how do you see other AI companies thinking through regulation in regards to the mental health space?
Well, a lot of digital products are actually like FDA regulated. That's really surprising to people. People are like, it's software, FDA does drugs or, med devices. If something is going to be reimbursed, if it's going to be seen as a part of treatment, it has to be regulated by the FDA. And so when you go to medical conferences, and we go to a lot of them, there's always this pitter patter of like the digital therapeutics that are coming out and where they are in clinical trials. So the supervisory function that exists within the medical field doesn't go away because you're using a software. Now, that doesn't mean that every software is quote unquote FDA approved. There are certain, chatbots, for example, that have decided as a point of strategy that they are going to just sell directly to patients, and they're actually not going to be FDA approved. There's not going to be commercial insurance, and that business decision is one that may or may not work out for them, but is also part of a changing landscape of the behavioral health world. But it's also not that new. People have been reading, their own literature, for example, about treatment, or going to see people that are kind of outside of the traditional boundaries of medicine for medical care for hundreds and thousands of years.
Yeah.
I think it's a blurry boundary, but it's always been a blurry boundary. Now, when it comes to administrative software like EHRs or AI scribes, there's a different set of regulations. So, the ONC is the office within the U.S. government that regulates EHRs that are going to participate in government programs, but non-ONC certified EHRs, and most people use non-ONC certified EHRs, or many at least, are still obligated and regulated to follow certain HIPAA protocols and follow certain like patient data protection protocols. So I'll give you an example. Within JotPsych right now, you can use JotPsych as an EHR, and a lot of people do. When you sign a note in JotPsych, we are obligated to hold that note for 7 years. You don't have to sign a note. If you want to delete it, it's gone forever. You can't get it. We can't get it. Gone. But the idea that, when you sign a note and you're using JotPsych as a system of record, we have a duty of care over that data is something that that is true for chatbots. It's true for for any medical technology that's really dealing with medical care, with medical data. So it's a complicated regulatory system, but it's not intractable, and it's not without precedent.
Mm-hmm. Now, tell me a little bit more about the documentation side. So how are people using AI to do documentation for their notes?
Yeah, I want to give a little history here too, because I think a lot of clinicians look at themselves and each other and say, how the heck did we get here? How did we get to a place where 50% of folks in behavioral health are spending 5 or more hours per day on medical documentation? And it's a really interesting story. Everyone was doing paper charts back in the early 2000s. And George Bush established this idea of, digital interoperable health records. And I think, love him or hate him, he had what was at the time a fairly popular idea, which was, if we connect all the patient records, we're going to be able to do better research. People are going to show up at a hospital and they're going to already have the patient record there. And in order to incentivize that, there were all these government dollars tied to the adoption of EHR. So between 2008 and 2014, basically everyone adopted electronic health records. And when that happened, there was also this simultaneous desire for structured data. You don't just want a notepad that has everyone's blood pressure on it. You want a table. You want an Excel sheet. You want a CSV file. And the way that the EHR solved that was that they just made a billion buttons and drop-down menus and little text boxes. And hospitals and researchers and, everyone who has, really positive intentions about medical data, it just created this huge amount of bloat in the structured nature of that data. So a lot of clinicians became data entry workers, basically, their own data entry workers. And, over that time, burnout, dramatically increased, particularly within behavioral health. And the problem just never really got better because there was never really a tool for improving it. It's once you're at the point where you want the structured medical data, before AI, you needed it. You needed to kind of do the data entry. But what's different now is that you can get all that structured data with AI. So again, just to use JotPsych as an example, if I mention someone's GAD-7 score in a JotPsych interview, that GAD-7 score is logged in a table and in a chart that is connected with their intake form, with their regular screeners that they do at home, and you get a longitudinal view of GAD-7. Now, in the old world, all of that would have to be typed in. In the new world, you just have the data and you can practice medicine with that data in front of you. So it's incredibly exciting. There's a really strong clinical reason for it. The way that people are using AI scribes and the reason people are using AI scribes is really diverse, though. So some people are using it just to save themselves time. And, off the bat, saves you 90% of time. It's an incredible technology. It, note generates in 20 seconds. You just walk into the encounter, click start, do the encounter, click done, boom, your note's finished. Now, there are other people who are seeing this as a way to create discipline around the way that they do billing or the way that they do coordination of care. So, there are folks who say, hey, I want to be able to understand differences in billing codes and why those apply or don't apply. And I want my AI scribe to help me with that. There's also a kind of speed to note completion element here. And you can think about that as being important at two levels. One, if you don't sign a note and something really bad happens to the patient, that is a very negative situation for you, because what's happened is you've got an open note, something critical happened to the patient. And if you sign the note afterwards, it can look like the note was basically ex post facto changed to reduce your liability. And when it comes to liability, that actually is not a liability reducing moment. That's a moment where, if, God forbid, there's a lawsuit or something like that, that is a big strike against you as a clinician. The other thing that's really important is working capital. You as a clinic are obviously charging patients and commercial payers, but you're also paying your own clinicians, you're paying for the rent in your office, you're paying for your software tools. And, there are clinics who say to me, Nate, the average clinician is getting their note in 7 days after after the encounter happens. And what that means is that they are out of 7 days worth of working capital of their own revenue, because the clock doesn't start on reimbursement until you submit the note. So there's a lot of really good reasons to use an AI scribe or something like that. And then the other element that's really important is again, back to this witnessing point, patients don't want you to be typing on your computer, writing on a notepad when you're with them. Patients, around 24% of patients say that it makes them feel like not heard, not seen, not listened to when you do that. So part of running a clinic and thinking about it as, a patient serving organization is taking that into account and realizing, oh, I now don't have to do that. And I can actually have all the benefits of taking better care of my patient, with all the benefits of them having a better experience, with all the benefits of not having a ton of documentation after. So it's really just like this win-win-win, no-brainer.
Mm-hmm. So awesome. Well, the last question I always ask is, if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
Yeah. The first thing is that, I am, every single day I wake up and I work on JotPsych, I'm blown away by the work that clinicians are doing. You as a group of clinicians are completely changing lives. You're supporting, people through what is, I think, everyone agrees, a very challenging point in history. And so I just want to say thank you, and say, like, no matter how frustrating the administrative burden is, the work that you do is super meaningful, and we all really appreciate it. Mm. I also have some advice for folks who are thinking about how their clinic is going to evolve with this AI revolution. And I don't know if now's the right time, but maybe I could walk through like a few of them.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so piece of advice number one, if you are a clinic and you're not measuring outcomes, I think that now is the time to really get on that. What does measuring outcomes look like? It looks like probably, if you're in behavioral health, measuring things like GAD-7 and PHQ-9 improvements. And the reason is because in this world of AI products, you want to be able to show that you are not competing on cost, you are competing on quality, and quality equals effectiveness and measurable effectiveness to payers. The second thing that I would recommend is an expansion of modalities. So if you are a clinic and you actually only do CBT, I think that you are at more risk than a clinic that's doing CBT and also med management, for example. And then the last thing is, I would encourage folks to think about diversification of clients, because certain insurers are going to be more aggressive about the way that they think about reimbursement in the AI world than others. And, diversifying your client base is the best hedge against, an insurer just being like, hey, well, we don't reimburse for this anymore for whatever bad reason that is. Mm. And then the last thing is, of course, just like, befriend the tools, understand them, be in the world of the tools that, that you can use to help yourself become a better clinician and serve patients better. So those are my pieces of advice for as someone who's like seeing the landscape change before my eyes.
Yeah, so awesome, Nate. If people want to connect with you, if they want to learn more about JotPsych, where should we send them?
Yeah, so go to jotpsych.com. That's JOTPSYCH.com. And, you can start a free trial on JotPsych within, I think, 1 to 2 minutes. It's really, really fast. There's no credit card swipes. You can get started without any kind of payment, record unlimited notes for your trial, and just see the future, be a part of the future. So we'd love to have you. And if you want to ever email us, contact@jotpsych.com is a great place. I see every email that goes to that inbox. So would love to connect and would love to stay connected.
So awesome, Nate. Thanks so much for being on the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
There's so many things that go on in the private practice world, and to have conversations like this on the podcast, I'm at 1261. That's a lot of conversations, but that takes a lot of work to have these kind of conversations. And that's why we started the Practice Academy. That's a place for you to join, to meet up with other therapists, to have conversations. We've got a whole discussion board similar to a Facebook group, but you're not getting sucked into Facebook. You're just in our community having conversations. We have over 30 e-courses. We have one course in there all about how to use AI in your practice. We have other ones that are on private pay, other ones on insurance building, growing a group practice. And then we have 3 live meetings every single week. So 12 a month that you can come to as part of the Practice Academy. So if you want to read more about joining this membership community, just head on over to practiceofthepractice.com/membership, and you can get started over there today. And, we couldn't do this show without our amazing sponsors like Gusto. Gusto, as a small business owner for me, paying and taking care of the team and getting, the benefits and taxes and all of that stuff is just really hard to figure out sometimes. So Gusto makes it way easier. And right now, our listeners are getting 3 months totally free. Just head on over to gusto.com/Joe. It's where we run our payroll. Again, that's gusto.com/Joe. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.